No, you are something great because you have an amazing Most High God. And that's it today. What will it take for you to believe that you are a king's son? You ever grew up hearing the story of Gideon? You ever thought about all the signs that Gideon asked of God, where he brought this fleece to God and he basically asked God to show him this big sign? Was that your favorite part of the story? That was always my favorite part, until I read the story for myself and I realized two really big things for my own journey with God. And it was in the beginning and after the peak of the story. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. Hi, my name is Natalie and this is By His Wounds, because by His wounds I was healed, and I know you will be also. So today we're reading from Judges chapters 6 through 8. I like to use the NLT version, that's where I'll be reading from. So the story of Gideon begins when the people of Israel had forsaken God. They rejected God and his leading, and they started to worship other gods. During this time, they had a lot of oppression from surrounding nations, the Midianites, to the point where the people of Israel were starving. Like they started to literally die of starvation because the Midianites in specific were destroying all of their crops. The Israelites had to actually hide their crops in order to save the little food that they had. And this is where you see Gideon come in. I'm going to read in chapter 6, verse middle of 11. So Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a wine press to hide the grain from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you." "Sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt, but now the Lord abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites?" Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you." You see that the way God directed himself to him, well, the angel of the Lord, but God, the first thing he calls him is a mighty hero, the Lord is with you. And I love how Gideon jumps right off the bat saying, wait, what? Where are you? Like, why has all this happened to us? So Gideon starts right off the bat asking questions to God. And I love this spirit about Gideon because truly, I believe that this is how God comes into your life. Sometimes it's you asking him a question, and any kind of that little opening you give to God, he can use that. And it's amazing to see that he's actually kind of bringing up like a doubt, but he's showing it to God and he's saying, "God, I don't see God right now. There's people dying back and forth. We are oppressed. So where is he?" So he knew the stories. He repeats the story of Egypt to God. God actually doesn't answer, but he tells him, "Go with the strength you have and rescue the Israelites from the Midianites. I'm sending you." And the next thing Gideon says sounds just like what Moses says when he was called. He says, "But Lord, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family." The Lord said to him, "I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man." Gideon replied, "If you are truly going to help me, show me a sign to prove that it is really the Lord speaking to me." I'm going to pause right here because first you notice Gideon telling God, how could I be the one? Not only is my family the weakest of the tribes in the area, in all the tribes, the weakest of all the tribes, but I am the least in my entire family. And God tells him again, he's not responding to who he is, to his weakness, to the kind of person he is. God is just directly saying, I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. And when Gideon asks this test of God, Gideon asks for a sign. He's not asking because he doubts who God is. He's asking God to show him a sign to prove that it is really the Lord speaking to him. So in other words, he wants to make sure that this is coming from God, the Most High, not another voice in his head. He doesn't doubt that God can do it, but he wants to make sure it's the right thing that he's hearing. So right after he tells that to the Lord to prove, he asked for his first sign here. It wasn't the fleece. He says, don't go away until I come back and bring my offering to you. So he actually offers something to God before he receives his sign. And I don't know why I think that's key. Sometimes we look for answers from God, and those answers can sometimes come, but sometimes they don't. And I think sometimes it comes from the motive behind it. I remember as a little girl, I asked God one time, looking outside of a window, I think maybe I was 10 or 11. And I said, God, if you're real, move these trees. And there were these like pine trees outside the window. And I prayed, God, if you're real, move these trees. Nothing happened. So I prayed again, God, if you're real, move them to the right now. And nothing happened. Then I said, move them to the left now. And nothing happened. Mind you, I knew God was real for myself in my heart, because as a little girl, I had certain experiences where I felt and I knew that God was real in my life. So me asking that question, God knew my heart, but I already had an answer. When I walked away from that experience, I walked away still believing in God. So it didn't change because I didn't receive that answer. But I think there are times where God knows our motive, and the motive, if it's coming truly heartfelt, he will speak to us. He will answer to us. So Gideon, instantly, when he came back, he baked this whole meal. The angel literally put his staff on it and it burned up. And he received a sign. He knew he was in the presence of God. Right after all of this, God asks him to go against his own father. He's the least in his family, and now he's being asked to go against his own dad. God asks him to break down the altar of his father's Baal worship. You notice God didn't take him directly out to go fight the battle of the Midianites, which is what he originally called him to. That's his calling. But he asks him to do something first before he does that. And it actually starts in his family, in his home. He asks him to actually do something that requires a lot of bravery. And I feel like in a way it's part of his training. A lot of the time it's part of our training in our lives, as God asks you to do something big in your own life that maybe seems so big, only for you to realize he's gonna ask you to do something even greater later. But he's gonna do it because he's with you. And what I love about Gideon is that in this story, when God asks him to take down this altar, you see him right off the bat. He follows instructions. In verse 27, so Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord had commanded, but he did it at night because he was afraid of the other members of his father's household and the people of the town. I don't care how scared you are. I don't care how weak you think you are. I don't care. You might be the shortest. You might be the weakest. You might run the slowest. You might be the last one picked on the team. With that humanity, that part of you that you feel like God can't use, you can use it nevertheless. God can use it. God can use it to uplift his name. And wherever you go and walk to, whatever he asks you to do, just follow the instruction he asks you to do. Even if you're scared, even if you can't do it in broad daylight, He's going to give you the strength, and he's going to empower you to complete whatever he asks you to do. And this is where Gideon's story gets good, because it's after this decision where he goes against his own dad, being the least in his family, that his own father defends him. So in my perspective, Gideon's dad believed in God again, because according to the story, I'm sure, he was an Israelite. He walked away from God. He started to worship idols. But his son is what led him to recognize he was not trusting in the right God. And now his own father is believing because of his son's choice to stand. And his own father defends him against the people that wanted to kill Gideon, actually, because he took down this altar. You read a little more forward, and like I said, this is when the story gets good, because the surrounding nations started to get together to fight against the Israelites. In verse 34, then the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon with power. Gideon ends up calling the Israelites, sending messengers to other of the Israelite tribes to get together to fight. In the end, he ends up with 32,000 men. Before this, he asked God, here was where he asked for the sign. When he asks for the sign of God, if God is really going to use him to liberate the Midianites, once again, he's not doubting that God can do this, but he's asking God to make sure of it. And this is where God just comes in with our humanity. Whatever question you have, whatever doubt you have, you bring it to God. God knows your heart. Maybe you receive an answer right away, maybe you don't, maybe it takes a few days. But I know God will answer you one way or another. As long as your heart, your motive is true, he will answer. That's how I came to know Jesus. Once again, it was through a question that I asked God 2 years ago. And he will answer you. But the motive in verse 36, if you are truly going to use me to rescue Israel as you promised, prove it to me in this way. And you know what? You read forward in verse 40. God did as Gideon asked. God will go down to your level. Whatever it is, whatever time frame, God comes to us. And that's the crazy part. No other God, so many other gods out there. You have to go walk over glass. You have to go buy these things. You have to go put these stones out. You have to go prove yourself. You have to go act right. But this God, Yahweh, our God, in the Holy Scriptures, comes to us wherever we're at in life. God came and Gideon asked him a question. If you're really going to use me. And God did what Gideon asked. That's news. That's the best news you could hear. God comes to you and he will answer you. Now, he may ask something of you right after, because he did the same for me, and he's going to ask something of you. But after this happened, and Gideon now had the faith to move forward, because he said, okay, God showed me with this fleece, when he put out the fleece and it was wet and the ground around it was dry, he asked for 2 extra signs. Then God asks a step of faith out of Gideon. And then this is where we almost get to the point of this story. You see that Gideon has to step out in faith when he started off with 32,000 warriors. 99% roughly end up leaving, because God tells him we cannot have this many men, or they're going to boast that it was the Israelites who saved themselves by their own strength. So God is almost testing Gideon because Gideon is like, how did I start from 32,000? He ends up with 300 men. I think that's rough, less than 1%, definitely. And God is so merciful he tells Gideon, but if you're afraid to attack the Midianite people, go down and listen to the camp. And at just the right time, Gideon ends up hearing a dream be interpreted that gives him the confidence to say, you know what? God is with me again. So even in his humanity, even in his human fear, he had faith, but he also had a little doubt in his heart. God saw right through it. But he saw that in Gideon's heart, he was willing to follow instructions. And that's all he needs of our hearts, if we're willing. Even if we have doubts, even if we got questions, you bring them to God. Point is, they won this battle, not with swords, not with shields, with anything. They literally won this battle with torches in their left hands and horns in their right hands, while they shouted, a sword for the Lord and a sword for Gideon. And there's a whole nother crazy thing about victories and battles that has to do with this. But I'm not going to go into that because it's not the point. But the reality is they won this battle without even fighting. All they had to do, it says here, each man stood at his position around the camp and watched as all the Midianites rushed in a panic, shouting as they ran to escape. The Lord caused the warriors in the camp to fight against each other with their swords. So in the end, they didn't even fight, but they did show up when God asked them to show up. They stood at their position and they watched God get the victory. And this is repeated in multiple battles in the Bible. Gideon gets this victory, and you know what? Some of the kings escape. Two of the kings of the Midianites, Zeba and Zalmunna, they escaped. So with a couple that escaped, apparently it was like 120,000 men were killed at this point, somehow forward, with just 300 men. But they didn't even fight, God did that. And Gideon is continuing. He doesn't stop. He keeps working, and he pushes forward to get these kings, to catch the rest of the people. He's working hard. If you remember, that's how the story started. He was working at the bottom of this wine press when God found him and called him. And then after they won the battle, he doesn't stop. He keeps going, even though he was exhausted, is what the Bible reads. He continued to push forward with his people. He's able to finally catch these kings. Before he catches these kings, in his tiredness, he doesn't ask for himself, but he asks for his warriors. 2 towns he stops by and he asks them for food and drink for his warriors. And these towns would not give it to them. Well, you know what Gideon tells them? He tells them, after the Lord gives me victory over Zeba and Zalmunna, I will return and tear your flesh with the thorns and briars from the wilderness. And then he goes to the other town. They also will not give him food and water because they say, until you go get the kings, we'll give you food and water. So he tells them, after I return in victory, I will tear down this tower. Once he catches them, he goes back to these towns. Once he catches the kings, and he says this to the leaders, here are Zeba and Zalmunna. When we were here before, you taunted me, saying, catch Zeba and Zalmunna first, and then we will feed your army, your exhausted army. Then Gideon took the elders of the town and taught them a lesson, punishing them with thorns and briars from the wilderness. He also tore down the tower of Peniel and killed all the men in the town. This is not the same Gideon that we started the story with. If you remember, Gideon was scared to bring down an altar to the point where he did it in the middle of the night. And it wasn't until this part of the story that he's literally, before he even got the victory, he proclaimed and he told them, I'm going to come back and you're going to get punished. We're going to get the victory. You didn't offer to help us and you are going to be punished. I'm going to bring down this tower. What happened? What happened in the middle? And this is a lesson for me and you, for all of us. Do you remember in Judges 6:34? What happened in the story is that the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon with power. That is what changed. Now, the Spirit of the Lord did not mean that Gideon could just go out and talk to every person like that. Because if you read a little before this victory, you see that he actually humbled himself to the tribe of Ephraim. You can see that Gideon has a really humble spirit and actually took the blame for not asking them for help. Although he knew God is the one who called him to have a smaller army. But you see that with the Spirit of the Lord, he had the bravery, he had the courage to do the thing that he never thought he could do. But God knew he could do it from the start because he called him mighty hero before he knew he was one. And that is what God does for you and for me. He sees what we can do before we do it. Before we believe it, before we know it, he already sees it. Because it's because of his power that we can do these great things. But you can't have this experience until you recognize this one thing. And this is the title. In Judges 8, verse 18, then Gideon asked Zebah and Zalmunna, these are the kings, the Midianite kings, the men you killed at Tabor, what were they like? Like you, they replied. They all had the look of a king's son. This is the difference. This is what makes this happen. Until you believe you are a king's son, that's where your story changes. That belief, that knowledge in who you are as a child of the Most High God is what will change your life. As the Holy Spirit goes into your life, when you believe this, you can believe this today. You will have the strength to do things you never thought you could do. And I am a testament of this as I film this. As I believed that I was a daughter of God, my life began to change, and it's been a process. But the Spirit of the Lord has been guiding me to recognize things, to step out in bravery, to receive a confidence I never had before, to speak in a way I could never think I would be able to meet strangers and talk to strangers and connect with them in a way I was never able to. This is what God will do for your life and greater. And I specifically want to encourage men, because this is a story of a man, of a king's son. Men, you have a calling, a great calling for your life. And it doesn't matter how weak you feel you are, how crippled, how addicted you think you are to whatever it is in your life. God is your Father. You're a child of the Most High King. And He will heal you. He will change you for His honor and glory. And you will see that you receive the courage, the confidence that you never in the world thought you had. But it's through this belief. As the Bible says, you are saved by faith in Christ Jesus. When you believe that Christ died for you on that cross, that He is your Father, you receive this. And if you're asking for a question from God, if you have doubts, if you've got questions and you feel like you can't hear Him, I want you to know, as a king's son, I assure you God is trying to talk to you. He's trying to talk to you right now, today, yesterday, tomorrow. But sometimes there are things in our lives that cloud our own selves from seeing it when it's so obvious. So I want to encourage you, whenever you go talk to God today, You tell him, you profess, and you tell him, I believe in you as my Father. I am your son. This is who I am. This is my identity. And you claim that you believe that. You ask the Lord to guide you. And he's going to show you which ways in your life might be drowning out his voice when he's trying to give you answers. But you're too busy listening to the same music, the same TV show over and over, where you can't even have a silent moment and hear his voice. You might be too busy playing it, video game, doing something else. You might be too busy trying to find a girl, trying to catch this person. And God is here showing you these signs that he loves you, that he's your Father, that he's going to give you the confidence. He's going to bring you the girl into your life. He's going to bring you the money into your life, the success, the healing. But you got to go to him because he's got it. You don't got it within you. He's got it. But because he's got it, you got it too. This is not a message of oh, I am nothing. No, you are something great because you have an amazing Most High God. And that's it today. What will it take for you to believe that you are a king's son? Believe it today. And you will be healed by his wounds.